Africa was a double victim of colonialism. First of all, because of colonialism itself. And I'm particularly at ease because I come from a colonialist country. But second, because when the institutions that are today the pillars of multilateralism, the UN, the Bretton Woods institutions were created, the African countries were not yet independent. They were not there. Their voice could not be heard. And so they were not represented, and today they remain dramatically underrepresented. Underrepresented in the UN, where there is still not one single African permanent member of the Security Council, which is something that is profoundly unfair and needs to be corrected, but also clearly underrepresented in the Bretton Woods institutions and other international institutions that were created to manage the global economy. And this, again, is something that a serious effort of reform must be able to correct. And I wanted to tell you that the United Nations is there to represent all nations of the world. But I believe that my role as Secretary General is to assume what is the need to address the dramatic inequalities that exist and to give the Global South the opportunities that the Global South requires in order to be able to catch up as quickly as possible, as it is absolutely essential for a matter of justice in our world. And climate change is the best example of that. As you said, Africa had a very small contribution to climate change, but many African countries are in the front line of the impacts. Floods, droughts, many other aspects. And this is a factor not only of poverty, in some situations of hunger, but a factor of instability. One of the reasons why the Sahel has witnessed such a progression of terrorist forces is exactly because of the impacts of climate change. It's not the only reason, but it is an accelerator of all the other reasons that are creating so many factors of instability within the African continent and other parts of the world. And indeed, the drama is that independently of everything that is being said, we need to dramatically reduce emissions this decade, and the emissions are still growing. And 80% of the emissions are of G20 countries, developed countries and large emerging economies. It's not Kenya, once again. In this case, Portugal also has a very small contribution. But the truth is, those countries have the responsibility, and it's good to see that Kenya is also ready to assume that responsibility, to dramatically reduce emissions this decade if we want to rescue the planet and if we want to make it still possible to get to an increase of 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. Unfortunately, we are not there. Developed countries are not doing enough, emerging economies are not doing enough, and we have proposed the Climate Solidarity Pact, in which both would assume more ambitious targets, and at the same time, developed countries would be able to provide the forms of financial and technological support for emerging economies to be able to accelerate their own transition into renewables and other forms of the green economy. And on the other hand, the economy, the climate change is there, and you witnessed that with the drought that you faced. And so, as you mentioned, adaptation, loss and damage, all these are crucial aspects in relation to which we have not yet found adequate answers. Adaptation is still not getting 50% of climate finance, and the loss and damage, let's keep our fingers crossed to make sure that it becomes a reality before the next COP in the Emirates.